Hello? Can you hear me? How's it going? Everybody a little looser after lunch, maybe a couple beers in? So we can really take on a light topic like mathematical approach to recipe development. My name is Mika Kraczynski. I'm a brewer at Strangebird in Rochester, New York, and I'm on the board of directors of the New York State Brewers Association, representing West Central region, which is Rochester and Point South. I'm here to introduce Geoff. Geoff Wenzel was born and raised on the banks of the Roundout Creek in New York's Hudson River Valley. He started his brewing career in Kingston, New York, in 2003 at Keegan Ales during his senior year of high school, which is, how old were you when you graduated high school? Simultaneously, he studied environmental earth science at City University of New York's Hunter College. In 2014, Geoff left his position at Keegan Ales to pursue an opportunity at New Belgium Brewing Company, never heard of it, where he specialized in cellar and yeast operations and wood aging. In 2018, Geoff left New Belgium's Fort Collins Brewery to accept a position as head brewer at the New Belgium's Denver plant, Denver pilot plant in Denver, Colorado. In 2019, he joined the team at Industrial Arts Brewing in New York as the research and development brewer. Geoff enjoys long walks through the woods of Catskill Park and the Shawangunk Ridge with his dogs Kia and Etta, life partner Christine, and their son Otis. Ladies and gentlemen, Geoff Wenzel.
Thanks, Mika. I didn't realize you were going to read that word for word. But yeah, I'm Geoff Wenzel. I've been brewing in New York for 20-some years now, and was hoping to talk to you about kind of the approach we take at Industrial Arts to keep our recipes consistent and also build new recipes using historical data, metrics, and KPIs. So yeah, any questions off of that? Feel free to raise your hand with any questions. So I get to be interactive, so I don't talk at you for 30 minutes. Yeah, so let's get into it. First things first, if you don't own this book, you should buy it. It's extremely helpful for any brewing equation, or most brewing equations, as you can see. It lives in my backpack. No joke. You can download it as a PDF online right now. I'm gonna go pirate it, or you can support the MBA if you want. But you should get the book. Very helpful. A little bit of basic algebra, and pretty much teach anything you need to know. Like I like to say, the math always pays off, as has been shown in this famous movie, The Hangover. My good friends out there. So just a bit of a rundown, like what I'm going to go through here. Quick blurb on data collection, some calculations for malt fermentables, hops and IBUs, and then kind of some post-boil knockout stuff, as well as some stuff we're doing for fermentation. Yeah, data. If you don't, start collecting it tomorrow. It's super important. And more important than collecting it is using it and finding the right program or spreadsheet or paper log, however you want to do it. If you're still analog, God bless you, use it. Some things I've found while building spreadsheets is some of the challenges I came up across is having different nomenclature for different brands and stuff throughout different spreadsheets, whether it's like what you call your beer on your fermentation log versus what it's called maybe in your brewing software. That kind of limits the capabilities of a spreadsheet to be able to use lookup functions and find that information. And then, yeah, so just briefly on KPIs versus metrics. I know when I submitted this, I pretty much said KPIs. It's kind of a buzzword. We'll mostly be talking about metrics for the purpose of this conversation, but very basically, KPIs typically include multiple departments or multiple areas of your business or brewery. Some things like brew house efficiency is going to affect how much malt you're going to purchase, which is going to affect your yield, and same with packaging loss and COGS, like how many labels you need to get for this batch that's coming through in 2 weeks. First metrics, which would be kind of your day-to-day data values, whether it's any variation in evaporation rate or apparent attenuation, etc. Does that make sense? Like I said here, all KPIs are metrics, but all metrics are not KPIs.
Squares and rhombuses.
Squares and rhombuses. Rhombus? All right, so malt and fermentables. A lot of people have talked about this this week, or at least I think Jesse from Queen City mentioned it in the Wrangling London 3 seminar about getting your malt COAs. It's very important to brew a recipe. You know, that's where your extract information was, and as pertains to yeast, that's where you're going to get your fan numbers or protein. If you're not reviewing these, you should. If you don't get them from your supplier, you should request them. If you intend to be specific and intentional with your beers, I highly recommend reviewing these with each lot, because malt changes. There's also even variability within a lot due to shipping and moisture and whatever. So this is just a quick example of like what a malt COA could look like. In my experience, some of them are they're all a little bit different in what they give you. But like some of our base malt doesn't give us DP. I've seen some analysis that didn't have extract, which I think is kind of crucial. But yeah, it's a brief, just kind of a look at what a malt COA could look like. Like I said, like Jesse was more interested in like the fan or protein, the callback that's over T. Where here, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to be talking mostly about extract, fine grind on dry basis, and moisture. Obviously, pHs and DP is pretty important as well. I mean, it's all important depending on what you're doing. So, just as an example, this is some variability in 25 different malt lots we've seen. You can see the bars are percent extract. It's hard to see. This is 80. That's 81. That's 82. Yeah, it's not a high-res projector, I'm sorry. And then the line represents variation in DP, which is standard. They say it's anything above 140 is an acceptable DP for a base malt, but we're seeing some numbers up in the 200s, which is great, but we're also correlating these high DPs to some over-attenuation, which is not so great, unless you want it to over-attenuate, but we like to be a little more predictable. So this is kind of what drove us to really dive into looking at or altering recipes based on COAs, because 75.5% extract is much different than 83.5%, so that could obviously change your OG quite a bit. And we do have the ability to dilute in the hot side, but we try not to. But I guess I'm most concerned with these low ones. We don't want to just be dumping sugar or malt extract if we don't have to. All right, so this slide I'm going to leave up there a bit. This is the math. I mean, this was all pulled out of this book that you can download for free on the internet or buy from MBAA for like $50. Just some basic malt calculations. I don't know if some of you are probably familiar with them. That first one This would change a little bit if you were just using percent extract as is. You would just use that multiplied by the weight. But I take account for moisture. So I use the fine grind dry basis. You know, obviously we're not all going to get fine grind values, but my approach is I like to look at it from the absolute maximum amount of extract we can get and calculate efficiency based on that, because even if we're not, it's still available there for us. So that's just money on the table. I will also say everything is in metric for the most part, with the exception of this color calculation. We typically work in metric. It's just easier. It's just better, easier to convert units. I don't know where y'all stand on it, but you know, pounds to ounces sucks, but kilos to grams is pretty easy. So yeah, just some basic calculations between like mash water, sparge water calculation, which is always kind of varies slightly. I use 96% for the entrenched water. But yeah, I see variation in that all the time. And again, this isn't all exact. There's a lot more variables than I'm accounting for in some of these calculations, which just some threads you probably just don't want to pull on. Or do it, you know, pull the threads. Yeah, and then brew house efficiency, where I'm calculating efficiency based on pre-boil work. So that, to me, is the best sign of how well we did at extracting the sugar from our grain in the mash. And then you could just use some algebra if you want to calculate for gravity instead of efficiency. I have my calculator set up to input gravity and calculate for efficiency. Some of these differ from the book just because of some algebra I did to get them where it made sense for me. Questions? Do you guys all know this shit? Okay. So these are some useful Excel tools that I found. As I was mentioning before, with using the same nomenclature to track your data, this data validation function where you can create a list is extremely helpful, because then you know every time you input that, it's going to be the same exact word, whatever your lookup value is, or number. So you won't miss on any formulas. VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP, which I use now, is an incredible tool. Is anyone familiar with XLOOKUP? It's fucking awesome. So VLOOKUP is kind of old and a pain in the ass to look up. You need to count cells. It's a little more complicated, but XLOOKUP is pretty basic. You input your lookup array, you input your return array, and then it just looks up for that value. What's that? For XLOOKUP? Yeah, I can go through it in a second. And this is kind of the calculator view. Tough to see, but essentially these are pulling from a page where I have all my inventory. I have inventory that I upload from Obeer or whatever inventory software, or however you're tracking your inventory. So I'm kind of stuck with that nomenclature. How that's entered in Obeer is going to dictate how all these cells look up. So obviously weight's an input here, and all these are populated based on the lookup function for bulk pills. So that's going to tell me my average extract, my average moisture, and I'm using averages most typically when I'm building something new. If we're going to alter an existing recipe, I'll go to specific COAs. Just to calculate your extract, you know, first percent, pretty basic stuff. Then I just put this little box over here, so if I, day of brew, I could punch in my exact crude oil to see like what efficiency we're hitting, just like in real time. Cool. Riveting stuff, right? Talk about that. Cool. So this is kind of a chart of how I'm estimating brew house efficiency. You can see here, this batch MTRC B21, we had kind of a low kettle full extract. That's when we made the switch to a different malt supplier. So we had a decrease in total extract there. But I'm still going to use that average for efficiency, even though it was pretty high. We had less malt. So we increased the malt loading on these 3 batches to target this efficiency, or to target this total extract, and we're getting those efficiencies, which I just pulled the average and kind of use that as a baseline when we're creating something new or adjusting a current recipe. Any questions on that stuff? Cool. Hops and IBUs. You know, this is an example of a hop COA just from the supplier. You can see that, right? I'm just kidding. There's no way you can see that. Or not Andy. Spencer just earlier today spoke pretty intensely on Yakima Chief's COAs and some newer tools they're providing. For the sake of this, I'm looking to calculate bitterness. Aroma data is pretty anecdotal, so the bitterness value, I'm just really looking at alpha to calculate isomerization. So here's our predicted IBU, weight milligrams, time utilization, time the alpha acid percentage divided by the total volume that you're adding to in liters. Something to note, you know, it's really difficult to really nail down what your utilization is. It's super dependent on gravity and pH, which vary slightly, but it's also dependent on boil time, volume, the type of kettle you're operating. So again, these are kind of broad strokes here. I'm not 100% certain that our efficiency is 25% for, you know, start boil addition. But these are just some guidelines that we use and update as we progress and get more data. So that's kind of like the calculator view. And again, VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP for this stuff, where I'm pulling my ingredients from a updated sheet from our ingredient, our inventory tracking, and then adding my weights and the time addition. See, that's an SMT. Our brew house in Pekin doesn't have a whirlpool, so our sedimentation tank essentially functions as a whirlpool. But we also cool sometimes up to or down to 70 C between the kettle and the whirlpool, hence that. But again, like that utilization's tough to nail down because, well, for various reasons. One being time is a major variable in this, and that makes it really difficult to really nail down the exact timing of every addition for every brew. I mean, even with an automated system, it's not always spot on because you have rinses and valve sequencing and whatever. Or, you know, you're weighing on hops and your timer went off and you're like, oh shit, I gotta finish this burrito. Or whatever the case. It's highly dependent on the equipment and the location. Even your altitude will change your boiling temperature, which will also change the rate of isomerization. And most brews have different gravities and pH. And that's just going to change. It's always going to change. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. And as far as IBUs, we know that this is not, isomerized alpha acids are not the only bittering compound in hops. So when we're measuring IBUs, it's kind of just taking a look at, granted it's probably most of the bittering compound, but we can't count on that always translating to sensory perception of bitterness. Testing and validation, this kind of gets tough. Like I said, when you pull the sample, like how many hop additions do you have in the kettle, it gets really tough to figure out what your utilization rate is per minute in your boil. So again, I just kind of use it as a baseline and kind of informative data, I think. So this is some IBU data that I gathered from our IPA power tool. You can see the calculated year is right around 60, and in the package we're getting in the high 40s, mid to high 40s. You're due to lose bitterness just from true and breakout, and when you pull it, then the yeast will pull bitterness. So, I don't know, kind of using this number, this historical data compared to, or calculated compared to actual from a third-party lab, can give us an idea of, you know, what we might want to see in the calculated IBU if we want an actual of 60 or 50. You know, I might want to increase. I can kind of guess, make an educated guess that I'm going to be about 27% off. This isn't a huge data set by any means, but I think y'all get where I'm going with this. Okay, post-boil and knockout. Everyone's favorite part of the day. This is by and far the most useful calculation a brewer can have, in my opinion. Are y'all familiar with the mixing formula? You use it all the time, I'm sure. This is huge. This has helped us a lot. But yeah, it can be useful for blending anything, blending alcohol, blending to color, IBUs, whatever, temperature, pretty universal. Our evaporation rate, you know, this is kind of tough to measure without flow meters, but you can, you know, my advice would be kind of use a standard one and go from there. I mean, we have a closed system, so we evaporated about 4%. So that's what we use. Whether or not that's exactly the same rate for every brew, probably not. Our cold cast volume, which is just the volume of your boiled wort once it's cold, just very generally 96% of the boiled volume. But I'll use that to calculate our brew house to FB loss. So I'll take the post-boil volume minus the knockout volume over the post-boil volume, boom, percent loss to FB. So that can help you nail down exactly how much you can expect to get in your tank. Estimating loss here. Here's some batches of metric we ran. Our cold side loss and actual BBT volume. You can see I use this as a percent because our knockout volume is always different, so I can't assume that's always going to be the same. These two values are missing because those are two-term batches. So I just throw that in this data set to skew it. So you can see our average loss time here is about 5.4% going to the FV. So what I'll do is I'll utilize that number and take, kind of just as an example up here, I took the average knockout volume from the last 14 batches and the projected BBT volume. This is the average knockout volume for the last 14 batches right here. Our projected BBT volume is 102.2 based on a 5% loss. Or 5.4% loss. So if I project that BBT volume out from this number, it basically gives me, I'm within 0.3% of that. So just as a little example on how we're kind of utilizing this data to get within the range, an acceptable range of what we can expect. Oh, that's a data sheet I was going to try to show you, but there isn't great visibility on this. So fermentation, any questions? No. Cool.
On the last slide you had all the cold side of Austin. What do you think happened with the second batch, 0.5%, going from 6.5 to 8.1?
Batch 11. I think we may have diluted this to spec.
Okay.
So we added some water, so that we don't do that often. So that's a kind of an outlier. Catch up. Fermentation. Here's some basic fermentation calculations. I'm sure you all know how to calculate a yeast pitch, and calculate your pitch volume. We typically just use ADF, or apparent degree of fermentation. But for real degree, you're actually taking effect the negative density of alcohol. So you just multiply ADF by that factor. There's a good section of that book all about that. And then that's how I'm predicting my final gravity. Is taking the OG and subtracting by the OG times the average ADF for whatever brand or style. I reckon that's the point too. Is I'll typically use this is very yeast strain dependent. I'm going to estimate final gravity. I'm not going to use my numbers from the ale strain for a while. This alcohol calculator is an estimate to say the least. We just kind of use this to make sure we're pretty close, and we sometimes validate with third-party lab GC data for ABV. But we're typically pretty close with that calculation. That's just kind of how the calculator view looks for me. It's going to take those previous sheets I showed you, and just kind of my inputs and attenuation here and gravity. I have a little dilution calculator over here, and this is pulling all my numbers so I can see what my projected knockout and also my projected BBT volume is. I think I've upgraded this recently to projected package volume as well, because that's a bit more of a useful number for the packaging and purchasing team to know how many labels they need to get. Dylan asked me about this water calculator. I stole it from my old boss. And way beyond the scope of this discussion. I don't know how y'all feel about water, but. So here's a quick example too of predicting final gravity, the amount of days of fermentation, and our ABV. So I did something similar here where I took the average OG compared to the predicted gravity versus the average gravity, and I'm about 2.4% off. So that's a pretty tight range, in my opinion. And same with the ABV down here, which is about 0.7% off. So just a quick example, and like I said, same nomenclature. These are all X lookups to pull from this master fermentation chart that I have. That helps me integrate everything. Some useful tools I used for this was a match function. Anyone familiar with this? This match function was great for finding FG in a data set of fermentation gravities, because you could basically match the minimum. If you have the gravity in there, you match the minimum value in a data set, and that'll output your FG. Or you could use match to match the max or whatever value you want to look for. Tape was super helpful too. I use this in my data sheets. This is a newer one. I think only the newer versions of Excel have this. But this enabled me to take X amount. So for example, like a wrench for, how many batches is it? 200? 250 batches of wrench in. So a view of all of those batches isn't going to tell me where we're at currently, because hopefully we're optimizing everything, so a lot of those numbers get lower. So this enabled me to take the data set and look at the last 10, 20, 30, 50 batches and kind of get a better picture of what I could expect at this point in time. cool, I'm doing okay here. And this is kind of the main sheet for my master data sheet, as I call it, an averages page. It's kind of difficult to see, but we have kind of our loss up here, our knockout stuff up here, and then a lot of our fermentation data down here, along with average fermentation, or max, min, and average fermentation days, final gravities, apparent attenuation, little fermentation graph. That looks a little funny because these are all based on averages. So over 26 brews, these are the average. This is the average gravity on day 1, day 2, so on and so forth. So sometimes you get like those little weird outliers. I think that's it. Yeah.
Back for a friend, do you have a link so maybe pirate that one book?
This guy does. I'm an MBAA member, so I cannot give out free books. I have to recommend you support your
They're on
local.
sale right now, I just got this
Boom, on sale.
20% off today, going through all the bookstore stuff.
No other questions?
Where are you originally pulling like the fermentation data from, for example? Like, say, I imagine you have a log that's like, day 1 extract.
Yeah. So we have a fermentation log that has evolved quite a bit since the start, you know? We're always adding new stuff to it, or new tanks or whatever. So at this point, I literally go through and just pull gravities for copy and paste, drop it into my table, and then utilize that table to spit out the functions, or spit out the values. That was one other thing I meant to mention too. If you guys aren't familiar with tables, they're extremely helpful. So when you add to a table, if you have a function that's looking at a column in a table, every time you add to that table, there's really no need to go in and alter your cell range because it just expands with the table. And if you're into pivot tables, that's some next level shit. Did you have a question?
Same question.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff I get pulled from OBIR. So throughout the brew day, when we log our brews, we log our QC data for that brew log, and that populates to an OBIR report. So I pull a lot of that brew stuff from there, but as far as cellar operations, a lot of that's manual with your sheets. So about once a month, depending on how many brews, I'll go through and just copy and paste that into a specific table that then outputs all my data.
So that table with all your metric batches is an export basically from OBIR or something like that?
Yeah, so what I like, and there's a lot of noise, and I'm sure if you ever try to import a CSV file, there's a lot of just blank columns, so I just kind of make a template and hide all the columns that are blank, so when you go and copy and paste the next time, it just, yeah.
The hop utilization matrix in the MBA calculations book, it never seemed like it was meant for craft brewers.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's an updated one that we could use? I know utilizations are different everywhere.
Right.
But like, is there just a standard?
Not that I've seen. I looked around. There's some like on the internet, but nothing super. Something that I hang my hat on. And I think it's just one of those things that's so different everywhere. It's kind of a moving target. But I don't know. The one I have an old presentation with a graph, but that was from like an old colleague that made it. So that's probably just as sketchy as.
Along that line, have you guys also noticed like much higher BU levels in beers with a bunch of cooled whirlpool hop additions where you're getting higher IBUs off that? Because we've noticed some of that where we're getting like the IBU number should be super low, and then lab testing comes back and we're like, how is it like 30 points higher than There wasn't really hot side addition.
Yeah, I mean, we've
I think
seen,
that test is flawed, that UV test, the ASBC
Yeah.
one, for that purpose.
yeah, we've seen, like on our hazy beer specifically,
Yeah.
the IBUs come in way higher than calculated.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
there's been some research on this too at Shellhammer's lab at Oregon State.
Yeah.
I would seek that out.
I know.
That actually reminded me, how did you come to that number of utilization for your, well, I guess not whirlpool, but what you call it?
SMT.
Yeah.
Just a little lower than you would see at like 90C. I mean, it's just kind of, like I said, it's just kind of a guesstimate at some point because there's certainly not a lot of data on hop utilization at 70 and 80C. Yeah. Okay, an educated guess is the answer. Yeah.
So you basically just calculated the normal flame out addition with like a little bit lower.
Kind of, yeah, yeah, based on just some like anecdotal knowledge
What you see.
from lab tests, yeah. But again, it's difficult because you're always adding at different times, and unless you get a sample before and after, how do you know what was contributed from that vessel or the kettle or what?
Yeah, the zero IBU like this.
Yeah, yeah.
The power tools batches that you showed that were calculated at 60 but validated at 50, we have the opposite effect on a hazy beer.
Mhm.
Yeah, and at what point will you have enough data to make an adjustment? We talked about this on Wednesday.
Yeah.
But
Welcome to an industrial arts R&D meeting. Yeah, I mean, we have a decent amount for rent.
Right.
But we've just never really,
because we want to narrow that gap.
Never
We're
really-
not saying you're going to miss by 27%, you're going to miss by 2.7%.
right. I'm not sure like that IBU measurement is an accurate way to depict what's really happening in the beer.
Yeah.
Perception.
Yeah, because like we're getting measurements for wrench, which is not really that bitter of a beer upwards of 70.
Yeah, it doesn't have more hops.
And it does not have more bitter hops, and nor is the bitterness expressed more, you know, so, I mean, yeah, that's something we can discuss, but I think like,
We use the same calculator for both styles of.
yeah,
All styles of beer.
yeah.
It's pretty much just that testing that is flawed.
The method
The
of
method.
tested, yeah.
Like, it just doesn't account for cold whirlpool additions the way it, you know. a 60
Sure, or dry
dry
hop.
hop, yeah.
Which like, if, in the calculator, I have that as 0 IBU addition because there's no heat, so,
Right.
but we know it adds bitterness, so,
Right.
yeah.
Do you guys test for IBUs?
No, we do quarterly QA check-ins, so, or if we get a customer complaint that warrants it, like we'll send out, but other than that, it's pretty quarterly, and then for non-alc, we send out every batch.
Have you ever gotten knockout word?
I have, yeah.
How does that line up?
It was actually much higher,
Higher than calculated?
yeah, where it was. I'd have to look, but I pulled it out of there because I only had one data point, so I didn't want to use it, but it came in quite a bit higher than expected. Yeah, so, work in progress. On IBUs? No, I haven't actually. It's a good point though. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it. Fucking do it. Fucking do it. Fucking do it. Yeah, if you guys have any other questions, happy to sit here and shoot the shit. You still got that UC, what's ours? Oh yeah, thanks for coming, I appreciate it, hope you guys learned something.